Today, I'm going to be speaking with Brian Keener and Feisal Somji. Both of them have companies that are producing high purity quartz. And I'd just like to say something as an introduction for our viewers. Silicon, the element which, when combined with oxygen, produces quartz, is the second most common element on this planet, even though most of you have no idea what it is or what it's used for. Once again, talking about myself for a second, in 1962, I began my career in ultrapurification of semiconductor materials. And so I've actually been involved in this area for, I guess, 60 years or so. And not much has changed in the way these ultra-high purity materials are produced. But what has struck me is how rare in nature are the starting materials to make the electronic and glass components that we need today in our technological society. We have here an unusual situation with two companies. One is Homerun Resources, and the other one is Sio Silica. They're both, I believe, Canadian companies. Is that correct, gentlemen?
That's correct.
Yes. Okay. And they each have deposits of very high purity quartz, or silica sand, as you might call it. And the intriguing thing to me is that the United States has perhaps one of the world's largest deposits of ultra-high purity quartz, but it's just one location in North Carolina. And what the United States is missing is enough processing capability for that particular deposit to be of great value to the now burgeoning chip industry in the United States, which is being reborn. The two companies we're going to talk to today each have very high grade silica deposits, one in Canada, the other one in Brazil. And the United States has what both of these companies need: capital. Luckily for them, America has been uniquely able to avoid downstream processing in most critical materials. So even though, for example, we do have a mine or two here that produce these materials, there's two companies doing it, both of them are European, and one of them actually sends its material overseas to be processed to come back to the United States to be used to make things. Now, gentlemen, after this convoluted introduction, I'd like you each to take some time and please tell me what you're planning to do. First of all, I'd be glad for you to describe your deposits. One of them is in Manitoba, one group of deposits, and the other one is in Brazil. I know a lot more about Manitoba than I do about Brazil because my parents came from Manitoba. But Brazil is a very big country. I know very little about it. So, Feisal, can I ask you to start and tell us about your deposit and what you're planning to do downstream of that deposit with your material?
Yeah, thank you, Jack. It's a pleasure to be here today and appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about our project and our company vision going forward. The project that we have is located about 40 kilometers east of downtown Winnipeg, so it's not remote. It has lots of great infrastructure around it. It's a large deposit. We're showing about 15 billion tons of sand in situ. For a recovery rate and for an SK 1300 or 43101 resource report, we use less than a 5% recovery, and so we show about 540 million tons of recoverable quartz sand material, albeit if I need more, which I doubt I would, but adding 1% recovery, brings me another 100 million tons. We were surprised to see that generally in mining and ore bodies, you see variability in grade, in purity, size distribution. We don't see that in our deposit. Um, the deposit is about 150 feet below surface. It's sitting in a freshwater aquifer, which is a benefit and a hurdle. In that the benefit is it's spent the last 500 million years being washed and turned over like a washing machine. And because of that, the deposit is very homogeneous. And so we're seeing similar grades, similar size distribution throughout the deposit. Of course, the challenge is that because it's in a freshwater aquifer, anytime you talk about drinking water, it becomes an emotionally charged conversation. And that's some of the issues that we've had regarding our permitting process. But we've developed a very environmentally friendly way to extract using just borehole airlift technology. And we believe when we are in operation, we'll be one of the most environmentally friendly mining operations worldwide, regardless of commodity. Our plan on what we want to do with this high purity silica is not only extract it and supply it for users through North America, but vertically integrate. And the reason being is, and I'm sure we'll get into that conversation today, but for silica to go to a semiconductor or a solar panel, it first goes through a variety of steps and it gets moved into generally some form of silicon, silicon carbide, a polysilica, silicon metal. There's a lot of opportunities for Canada and for Brazil to get involved in that advanced manufacturing process, at which, in my opinion, has really been given China its dominance over not only this commodity, but all of other commodities because of their investments into advanced manufacturing. And I think that's our intent with our project is to get involved with that, vertically integrate, and start using that material here closer to home.
Thank you. Brian, would you bring us up to date on what you're doing, please?
Sure. Thanks, Jack, for the invite as well, and nice to meet you, Faisal. We have a lot in common. The resources that we're dealing with are of similar size and similar uniform structure. The only distinction is our resource sits at surface, so it's easily accessible. The mining technique is simple extraction using a front end loader and a hopper, and then feeding that into whatever processing is right next door. So our focus is already on, we've got permits in place. Our focus is already on moving that product into the marketplace. We have a commercial team now working out of Brazil in that regard, building potential partnerships to do that. And then internally, we also have been working on a vertically integrated strategy, basically 4 pillars. The first is process silica, or the silica, being upgraded. The second is advancing that silica using further processing techniques into advanced materials like silicon carbide. And we've been working on that with some research partners in the US to try and do that clean and green. The US has another resource, which is incredible research and development capability. The other thing that we're doing, because Brazil's such a large solar market domestically, is we're developing a solar glass business in proximity to the resource. It's a natural use. Our silica literally goes straight in after wash and sort, goes straight into a solar glass furnace. And Brazil last year was the 3rd largest installation player as a country for solar installations behind China and the United States. So great domestic market for a large resource relative to having a domestic opportunity very close by. And then we've been working with NREL in the United States, US Department of Energy, in order to utilize our silica within the context of their thermal particle energy storage system called the Enduring System. That's been an 18-month relationship that's ongoing. And now we're focused on commercializing what we've learned through the use of our silica in their system. We've also learned that our silica can be processed in their system, which is novel. The industry at the real high end, including the product that you're talking about in the United States, is usually calcined. In other words, it's heated at very high temperatures in order to make it more susceptible to leaching, which is done with chemicals, usually acids. And so from that perspective, if we can pull that step out of the processing process and make it clean, because it's an energy storage system, then we're already cleaner and greener than any product out there. And obviously the advanced materials, we're focused in particular, because our focus is battery and solar. We're focused on the anode side of the battery market, which currently is dominated by graphite. We have a graphite company in Brazil as well. But our focus is composite anode, which is potentially silicon carbide on its own, but preferably silicon carbide in a composite with graphite. That, from our development work, we have one of the best PhDs in graphite materials based in Brazil, in Sao Paulo. So yeah, we've been advancing our model and been around for, I guess, almost 2.5 years now in that process.
Are you, both of you, are you surprised by the emphasis now in the United States on bringing chip manufacturing back to the United States? Because when your companies were both founded more than a couple of years ago, yes? Okay, so that this situation here in the U.S. where suddenly we're going to bring back basic production of basic raw materials for manufacturing high-tech material, like semiconductor materials, ultra-high purity silicon wafers, for example, solar glass. Suddenly, to me, the United States is on a tear to get this done, and it's throwing money at projects. So my question to both of you is, have you been affected by this? Has the U.S. government, are they aware of your projects? Have they reached out to you and said, what can you do for us because we need your material?
Yeah, I think, from our side, Sio's been around now for 9 years.
Mm-hmm.
All of our offtake agreements right now for our product is with semiconductor companies in the US. We've gone through a variety of testing with them to show that the product can meet the specifications for what they need. It's not surprising to me that the US has moved towards that. I think bringing in back some dominance and some independency from China is important for all countries around the world. What we have seen happening in the US is that although there's a lot of capital flowing and a lot of projects starting to be initiated in semiconductors and solar and AI, it is still a real battle for the raw materials and where that raw material is coming from. And as we touched about before, it's also where the initial advanced manufacturing or even beneficiation is going to happen. And as an example, one of the companies we have offtake agreements with, very similar to what happens at Spruce Pine in North Carolina, will go into the US and then into Malaysia to be beneficiated, and then back into the US to eventually end up with a semiconductor. And that's why my comment earlier is there's opportunities here for both Canadian and US businesses to get involved with things like that. We can beneficiate that material here in North America and go straight from a raw material to a final product.
Right?
Yeah, I fundamentally agree with that. I think there's one caveat though with throwing money at these solutions. The reason behind the purpose behind these capitalizations is obviously supply security. Political and regional events around the world have made that priority one. That's why everybody has a critical materials list now, and we never heard about these things 10 years ago. The concept of the Americans competing with the Chinese and some other Southeast Asian countries on basic production of silicon using traditional techniques from an economic perspective, that's not viable. And the reason why is because they can't compete on cost. Both CapEx and OpEx, they won't be able to compete. So the two things that are required is protection, which is what's being put in place now, and novel techniques. What the United States needs to do is not just build what sits in China and other parts of Southeast and other parts of Asia. What they need to do is look at new creative techniques and how to produce these products so that, one, they can get better economics, remove some steps, so to speak, because most people aren't aware that the process of taking silica to silicon is nasty, dirty, long, and literally brute force using energy. It's highly energy intensive. And so from that perspective, there is an advantage if you're using alternative energy. In order to do that process, those techniques need to be developed further. It's one of the reasons why we're working with NREL and UC Davis. So I think a straight on, line against line, that's going to be a difficult equation. I think a period of protection makes sense, but I think ultimately American creativity needs to come in here and come up with novel methods in order to produce these materials. And silica really, really, really is the key to two of the biggest, almost three of the biggest, because it's in wind turbines as well, but key to two of the biggest technologies in the energy transition, which is solar, the absolute winner in cost effectiveness for now producing energy, period. There's nothing that competes with the cost of solar anymore. And the other is battery. Like, you need energy storage. Solar doesn't function properly on the grid or off grid unless you can store that energy so it can be used later. Simple economics. So when you look at that, yes, the need is there. The strategic need is there relative to controlling supply lines. If China turned off its silicon supply to the United States or to other countries right now, that would be disastrous. I mean, if you think of where all those chips go, not necessarily in your mobile phone, but in the equipment that is, and processing capabilities that's in airplanes, that's in tanks, that's in anything of a strategic nature, that would be very difficult for the United States to actually produce those products over the long term without those widgets. And we've seen that with Russia. So from that perspective, I think their mandate is correct, but I think they need to put more money into the creative solutions in order to take Faisal's product and our product and make that economically viable in the United States of America to produce basic silicon and basic silicon carbide.
Well, to be honest with both of you, when I first heard about this topic, I thought to myself, wow, it's another case of American lawyers being defeated by Chinese engineers. And the way it works is that Americans love to build factories. So they say, okay, we're going to process silicon into ultra-high purity silicon for electronics, for glass, I think. And I sit there in these meetings, I say, where is it you're going to get the raw material? Well, they, capital T, they will provide it. Now, what's intrigued me about both of your ventures is that I was not aware of them. Okay, because I never believed that America did not produce the raw material it needed in this basic technology. But of course, I was wrong. And so have either one, if you'll tell me, and I understand you may not want to talk about this because of competitive advantage, has either one of you been sought out by Taiwan Semiconductor? Okay, no answer.
You know what? There's been, from our experience, there's been a variety of incoming calls, both from overseas as well as here within North America. As an example, there's a new technology being developed by the U.S. Air Force on some of their wingtip designs that use high purity silica, and so and they very quickly realized that where are we going to access this raw material? Is there enough availability of this material before we go too far down the road? So we've had, we've had a variety of incoming calls from groups like that, and other groups overseas in regards to just security of long-term raw materials.
My guess is that in the next 3 years and 2 months, it's at the remainder of President Trump's term, that people like Taiwan Semiconductor, let me explain to the audience. Taiwan Semiconductor is the world's largest manufacturer of integrated circuits, chips. Okay, so in fact, almost all of them come here from there. The ones that we buy in the United States, and they're free, of course, to source their materials wherever they like. But under the current American administration, my guesses would be that our government in the United States would say to them, we would really like you to source from here. Okay. And I suspect because of the size of the business, they'd say, okay. But of course, they say okay because they can't do it. There's nobody that can supply them at this point. And I'm thinking that both of you are planning to be that supplier. You're going to be the one.
That's a good point, Jack, and I think it's really important. I mean, Taiwan Semiconductor is actually building a massive, gigafactory in the United States right now, in order to leapfrog a potential tariff wall, which is what always happens, right? With tariffs,
Right.
the Chinese will do the same eventually. And I'm old enough to remember when the Japanese were starting to dominate the auto industry from Japan and the United States and other areas, put up tariff walls, and the Japanese then started to build auto plants in Tennessee and places like that. So I think the plants will be built. Who owns them will be the question. But I don't think that's an issue relative to the United States long term. Maybe right now under the current administration, but not necessarily over the long term. It's about having that secure supply, and it's about manufacturing that product. Ultimately, it comes down to economics. And if you're going to supply silica to anyone, you need to understand that silica is a real heavy logistics business. And so if you're selling quantity, it's not like gold where, at your mine, you get rid of all the impurities and you sell a bar of gold and that gets on a helicopter or an airplane and disappears. With silica, you're moving the entirety of the product. So everything that Faisal's company or our company produces has to be moved, because you're talking about a product that's 99.5+% pure. And the material that you're removing here is a small amount of the overall tonnage that you then need to move. So the economics of transport are key. The economics of purity are key. So everyone talks about high purity silica, but they never say why. And the reason is the highest quality going in creates the fastest highest quality going out. And so from that, because you're removing impurities in this process. So if you have Faisal's product or you have our product as a starting block, then you're better off. So this is where the demand structures will come from. Also, what they have and what we have is extremely rare. The most used commodity in the world next to water on an annual basis is silica. It's silica sand. But a lot of that sand goes into sandbox or goes into cement or goes into a bunch of industrial purposes, and you don't make much money for a ton of it, and it's very low grade. It's like beach sand. And so from that perspective, what they have and we have is extremely rare, extremely rare. So if you can find that type of resource and you can find it close to a large domestic marketplace, like they have the United States, we can ship easily to this eastern coast and Gulf Coast of the US if we wish to, or Europe, etc. These are the parameters that we have to look at, because politics lasts for this long, economics lasts forever, right? And so everything that we do is based on an economic model. We've been approached by entities out of Asia. We've been approached by Korea, Japan, China, Taiwan, etc., players out of Europe, all interested in, hey, when you get your processing in and you've got your high purity product, we're very interested in integrating and testing that and integrating into our more developed products. And there's a variety of use cases for that high quality product. But that basic logistics is really important. and then having domestic industry close by to validate the capex of your business opportunity is really important as well. Because what they have and what we have is something that's so pure that it's really close to really high-end final products. So the shift, the margin shift from selling raw material to selling something that's more advanced is massive. And that's what needs to stay in his company, and that's what needs to stay in my company, which is, we need to keep these margins inside these vertically integrated companies.
That's what surprised me about both of your companies. As I told you, I started out in my work life in ultra purification, and the paradox of that business is that you have to ultra purify materials so you can selectively contaminate them to produce the products you want. And nobody could understand that. Why are you going to all this trouble purifying when all you're going to do is mix things up again? Well, the thing is, in those days, I don't know where we got high purity quartz. I don't recall. But when I looked at the analysis of the deposits that both of you have, I was shocked, because basically you've got a little bit of iron and all the rest is silica, okay, which is ideal for a starting point for these materials. And one of the things that the public needs to understand is that these high purity quartz deposits do not grow on trees. They're very, very rare. And compared to them, rare earths are common. Okay. And so I was not aware that Manitoba had such deposits. I certainly wasn't aware that Brazil had such deposit. And so you fellows are economically halfway there, because the cost of purifying this material, as you know, is very, very high. It's amazing. People say, if this stuff is made out of sand, how come it's not free or cheap? Because it's a long way from sand to 6-9 silicon that you need to start with to make chips, for example. So I'm impressed, but I have to ask, what brought you to this business? Because what did you, are either one of you a geologist? No. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So why did you choose this business rather than, let's say, fast food or ice cream?
Well, I'll tell you quickly my story. When I grew up, I wanted to be a commercial pilot, and I ended up being one and flying bush planes in northern Canada when back then Chuck Fipke announced he discovered diamonds in northern Canada. And flying all the guys in and out of these mining camps, I realized that flying was getting a little bit boring for me, except for the few minutes of takeoff and landing. And I could make a lot more money working in a mining camp than I could flying back then, bush planes. So I ended up jumping ship into the mining world as a result of that, and really cut my teeth in the diamond industry that developed in Canada, that looked at things differently from outside the box, and new and innovative ways to explore and develop. We were developing kimberlite pipes underneath lakes, and that hadn't been done before. And so very similar to this project here, and as Brian has said, it's an economics game, and we can find new technologies and new ways to reduce costs. We can compete worldwide, and we can make the end product even better and more pure. So it's very similar to how I started, is where I am today.
Yeah, and my background, 30 years in materials and technology. A few years ago, this thing called the energy transition came along, which literally, if you want to define the energy transition, it's technology meets materials, which has occurred all the time, but everyone ignores that. The difficulty that Feisal and I suffer from is that silica never gets any credit, right? There's this, like, if you look at the critical list update that just came out, they didn't name silica as the critical element. They named silica processed into silicon as the critical element, whereas everything else on the list is a raw material element. So, silica is sort of like that guy in the room that has a lot of money but gets no credibility because he's not dressed very well and he doesn't wear fancy shoes. But silica is really the bread and butter of the energy transition, along with things like copper and graphite. And so what we did a few years ago is we did a top-down approach to the industry. We've been in the industry for a long time, and we looked at, okay, what commodities are we interested in? What elements are we interested in? And where are we interested in them? And being Canadian and being in the materials business for a long time, but having done a lot of work in Latin America, we started fairly global, and where can you really do this? You can do this in Australia, you can do this in Brazil, you can do this in the United States, and you can do this in Canada, as far as countries that have the buffet of these elements. And so we picked Brazil because it also had a very large population and a very progressive government relative to the energy transition. So we just thought, with government support from the top down and a large population, and already having 85% of their energy from alternative methods already, even though solar is a small part of that currently, we thought that was a good place to be. And the resources there and the costs there are easier than they are in, say, Australia, Canada, United States. So that's what we did. And then we looked at materials that had really good industrial bases. So copper has a really good industrial basis. There's a ton of use cases for copper, and they're growing all the time. Silica is the same. Silica has a ton of use cases, and they're growing all the time. So from that perspective, we wanted something that wouldn't be turned off if somebody discovered a new element to put in the battery. I won't name the material. And so from that perspective, we chose one that was quite large, and in an industrialized country like Brazil, where the playing field was regulated in favor of companies that are trying to produce these materials. So that was our view of it. We see ourselves as a global entity. We have footprint now in Europe. We have footprint in the United States, footprint obviously in a big operating team in Brazil. And we were founded, by a Canadian who currently lives in Brazil, myself. So we've done a lot of work in this space. We understand the energy transition. We can actually define it. We're actually telling government in Brazil what they need to do to facilitate their mandate in the energy transition. We, as Homerun, we're being asked to go to these meetings. So it's a very progressive environment relative to what we're doing. And silica is a key material. You're going to see that over the next 5 to 10 years. Maybe it'd take a little longer, but over the next 5 to 10 years, people are going to start talking about high purity silica and how it is such a key and essential element. And you can use that visual, right? I remember over the years, everyone says, yeah, if you take oil out of your life, everything sort of falls apart and you're living in it. You're standing in the middle of nowhere. And silica, if you do that within the technology world that we live in, you take silica out of everything that we use, you'd be incredibly surprised at how radically backwards our progress in technology would revert, because it is a key essential thing, but it's called silicon. It's never called silica, but silica is the basis for silicon.
Okay, now let me ask you both this question. When will you be in production of a revenue generating product? And what do you see as the market? Is there going to be growth in this market in the next 10 years? In the next 100 years? I mean, is this a good market to enter? And when will you be able to generate revenue?
Yeah, from Sio's perspective, we're going through our final permitting phase with the Manitoba government. We're hopeful that by the end of the year, we will see a mining permit in our hands. We are in a unique position in that, rare to us development and mining companies, we're actually fully funded for production already. So all the capital we need to build and initiate the mining operation is already accessible, pending a permit. The uniqueness of the product not having, it's not an open pit. There's no strip ratio there's no preparatory work that we have to do to get into the main area. So, we drill a simple 12-inch water well hole and we're producing in a matter of 2 or 3 days. So we can go from permit in hand to operations within 12 months. There's no anticipated delays because of financing. We have offtake agreements already in place with the semiconductor industry in the US. And so, we anticipate being cash flow positive within, 12 to 14 months from when we get the permit and break ground.
Okay.
Fantastic. We're a little ahead, but that's because somebody else did some work for us before we got there. So we're permitted. We're advancing the permitting process over the balance of the resource, but we can sell product now. We have first stage processing, which is wash and sort. As I said, we're open to the sky. There's nothing to remove here. It's just silica staring at the sky. So the mining technique here is front end loader into a hopper and a conveyor belt and a conveyor system. So we're in the process of commercializing our product. We have a team now that are working on that relative to talking to industrial players in Brazil and elsewhere, preferably international companies that have presence in Brazil and elsewhere. And that's an ongoing process. We were in meetings today, actually, with one of those. So we're in the commercialization process. We're permitted. We can sell now. That's not the key function of why we're building our business, though. The key function of why we're building our business is to bring that other capacity to the resource. So our plan is to build a solar glass facility next to the resource. As I stated previously, our silica is perfect. Literally, Mother Nature made it for solar glass. When you wash our silica, it's less than 10 ppm iron. The Chinese hurdle rate for iron in solar glass silica is 120. They're cheating on that now and just adding more antimony to the product, which is creating a recycling nightmare in the solar industry around the world. And we can help fix that as well. So our big focus as far as big capex and big production is to utilize our silica in our solar glass facility in Brazil. That'll be somewhere around 300,000 tons a year on first throughput. And that will produce 5 gigawatt equivalent of solar glass. And the Chinese cannot compete with us in Brazil on solar glass because the cost of solar glass is 60+% in the logistics of moving it from where you produce it. So if you're producing it in China and you're selling it in Brazil, you can't compete with a solar glass producer in Brazil. So that's really the big aspect of our cash flow model. But we can sell silica now, and we're in the process of commercializing that as we speak.
Feisal, do you have any plans to go downstream in product?
We do. We've talked to and we're now partnered with a large solar panel or solar manufacturing engineering firm out of Germany. This company, I think the largest outside of China. They've done about 60 gigawatts of production worldwide. They've got about 26 operations, or they're working in 26 different countries, building solar panel manufacturing facilities. When I originally started speaking to them, we were thinking about vertical integration towards parts of the solar panel manufacturing. So, for example, creating the polysilica for it. What we eventually looked at, and very similar to Brian's comments about economics and pricing, the production of a solar panel requires a lot of energy because you are taking that silica to a polysilica or silicon metal. They want to create solar panel facilities that are ESG friendly. And so the input of electricity or whatever power is being used is very important to them. And when we started looking at Manitoba, we saw that Manitoba has a clean, renewable energy hydro source. It also has one of the lowest power rates in North America. And in the engineering work that these guys did, and this company is called RCT Solutions, and they have RCT power as well. As Brian said, the power on the battery side is very important to the solar industry. At the end of the day, they have come in and said, we believe we can produce a solar panel in Manitoba for the same landed cost as a Chinese panel. And that's the first time that he's been able to say that. And he is being enticed by the US government to come into the US side because of the market's growth in solar industry, and also Brazil, because they see a large growth in Brazil as well. So our intentions is to look at working with this group to create a solar panel manufacturing facility from the ground up right into the panel in Manitoba.
Okay.
Yeah, we should chat after the call, Faisal.
Well, you know,
Lots of synergies.
if I had to think of the worst place to cite an energy intensive industry would be Germany. Okay. And so I would think that European companies in general with technology would be seeking both of you out, because you can't, the only place in Canada you can get cheaper power is probably Quebec. Okay. Besides Manitoba. And as far as Brazil goes, I'm not aware of it. I don't think power is particularly expensive in Brazil.
They have varying rates. So you can, in Brazil, you can sign like an alternative power supply agreement, even though you're not grid connected directly to that alternative supplier, like a CNG. A lot of them are Chinese based. And then you'll get a wholesale industrial wholesale rate. But we're working with the state power regulator, which is federally mandated. And we'll get a wholesale rate from them that's kind of built into our business plan. And then on the gas side, because we'll be using natural gas as well in our operations, Bahia Gas, we're in the state of Bahia in Brazil. They will be giving us, Brazil doesn't have a lot of natural gas infrastructure. And so a lot of the natural gas that comes along from their hydrocarbon business is not utilized. So they're always looking for industrial customers relative to natural gas, and the price points are extremely cheap. So yeah, energy is not our big issue. The big issue for us is domestic market demand, and then the logistics to supply that demand. What's happened in Brazil is that the Chinese are 95% of the solar module production, solar module market through imports. The domestic market is like 1.5 gigawatts last year. China was like 18.5 import. And so the federal government has raised a solar module tariff to 25% from 9%. Now the domestic players can actually make money in Brazil. They can actually make okay money. Before they were skinning their knees or going broke, because the actual capacity of solar module production in Brazil is 5 gigawatts, but only 1.5 was making any money. So I expect in Brazil, you're going to see a lot of international players, in particular the Chinese, again, doing the leapfrog over the tariff hurdle, and building out manufacturing capability in Brazil. We focused on glass because no matter who builds the solar panel, they need glass. It's a key component. And we will be able to produce the best quality in the world and the cheapest solar glass in Brazil.
It's interesting to me that it's okay. Brazil puts a tariff against the Chinese. That's okay, right? America does it. That's the end of the world, evil, no good. It's amazing, isn't it, how perspective seems to make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, Brazil has a huge trading relationship with China, so there's a
Of
little
course.
more give and take. Yeah, it's a lot bigger than Brazil's relationship with the United States, like
Right.
by exponential amounts. And China is in a difficult position with Brazil because Brazil is a key raw material supplier to China from the perspective of agricultural products and resource products, in particularly iron ore. So there's this sort of they get along with each other, but the Chinese know that it's not novel around the world. The Chinese know that they're going to get some form of barrier placed in almost every market that they've literally been dumping solar modules. China overbuilt their industry. It's a common thing in China when they're in an industry to overbuild capacity and then dominate globally by dumping into that global market to literally destroy the global industry and then cleanse their own industry. And now all of a sudden they're like, oh, okay, we're producing a really nice quantity for a really nice demand and we're going to make all the money because Europe has no production, the United States has no production. So I think that model has been identified by Europe and by the United States and other players. And now they're just going, hey, you know what? You can play in our backyard, you can play in our yard, but the reality is you're going to have to build it here. So I think you'll see solar module capacity and the CAGR on solar is huge. It's 30%. Like there's not a lot of industries in the world that have a CAGR of 30%. But yet solar, the companies that are in solar make no money because China has decimated the economics of solar, but that's now changing. That's changing.
It looks to me like the two of you have a lot more in common than you do as competitors. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we built our business through partnership. Being Canadian, confrontation works sometimes. I'm a Canadian rugby player, so there's a bit of a dichotomy there. But the reality is partnership moves things forward way faster than being crazy competitive. We're in a particular market where we have a strategic advantage. We're focused on that market. I think there's some opportunities relative to the two companies to start chatting about some of the new ways in which we can build economics into our business models, where we're not competing with each other because they're obviously in a totally different territory. And remember, this industry is dominated by logistics costs. So, moving our product to Canada or to the United States versus moving Faisal's product from Winnipeg to where the battery regions of the United States are, where the solar regions of the United States are, is relatively easy because the infrastructure in North America, especially rail, is incredible. The infrastructure in Brazil, there is no rail. So everything is truck.
Well, and I think also to add to that is, less than 1%, and maybe even quite a bit less than that, of silica deposits in the world wide can meet this type of quality. And so the scarcity of the raw material that's needed for solar, for battery, for semiconductors is really going to go into, a supply issue. And companies are seeing that around the world. And so there's no need to compete. There is enough of a market out there for all of us. And really, we can work together because if we can make our products cleaner, better, more cost efficiently, it helps all of us.
Yeah, and he's right. And it's easier to do that as a new producer than it is to do that as an entrenched old producer with old manufacturing capacity. So I 100% agree with that. I think people need to understand, obviously, this is a call about, the investment opportunities relative to critical materials. And I think everybody needs to open their mind up to the fact that silica per se, high purity silica, is a strategic component of a portfolio that's focused on, the world going out 5 years, 10 years. And I can show you right now how strategic it is relative, but as we burn through a finite commodity, the sand that goes in your child's sandbox is plentiful and will be plentiful for 1,000,000 years. The sand that goes into silicon, the sand that goes into extra clear glass and solar glass, the sand that goes into silicon carbide, the sand that goes into these optical high-end uses, that is gold. And I think smart investors should realize that and position themselves into undervalued companies that, generally speaking, have very low OPEX, right? I mean, to produce an ounce of gold is super expensive. To produce a ton of silica, whether it's Faisal's or ours, is super cheap. And so from that perspective, you've got OPEX on your side, you've got CapEx on your side, and you've got a demand curve and supply that's going like this and demand that's going like this. I took Economics 101. I think that's what you're supposed to be looking for.
What dawns on me is that you're not going to see a whole bunch of silica or us juniors it coming to the market and with announcements that they found high purity quartz at the bottom of Lake Pontchartrain in New York. And so you have, it's unusual to have as few deposits of this material, considering how important it is. And the fact is, China dominates this space because China has basically set itself to do that. Okay, I don't think the Chinese worry too much about economics at this point, but
Yeah, but they import their high purity silica, right?
no, I
The
understand.
Chinese are not domestically producing this product. They're actually an importer. So China usually has its own domestic supply. At this high end of the silica pyramid, they do not.
Okay, again, that's how nature designed this world. Okay, that's too bad. But Brian, if I understand you correctly, you're saying the Brazilian market is what you're targeting because it's large, and you think you have the competitive advantage for political as well as ordinary economic reasons.
Yeah, we have an economic advantage versus the traditional player in the industries that we're attacking. So,
Mhm.
we have that because we're in Brazil. We have that because our high purity resource is in Brazil. If I'm in Canada, I have to look to the United States for that advantage
Right.
because
Right.
Canada doesn't have that, but the United States, right next door,
And
it does have that. Brazil has that self-contained. Brazil has a huge, fast-growing solar industry that is becoming domestically focused from a manufacturing with a president that wants it that way. It has battery players, CATL, BYD. It's got a huge automotive industry that's now transitioning to EVs. Again, the Brazilian government gave the old Ford factory in Camaçari, Bahia, to BYD. BYD turned that around and they're now producing EVs for the Brazilian and Latin American market within 3 years of that transition. So the players are coming to Brazil and they're looking at it from the same perspective that we are. BYD's here because there's a huge domestic market and they can also create economies of scale relative to moving those products into other parts of Latin America and elsewhere. But their first focus is Brazil. Our first focus is Brazil.
And Faisal, like as Brian said, you're adjacent to one of the world's largest markets for your product. Okay. The problem is that the US has been producing some and importing all the rest of it for so long that I suspect that your biggest problem is awareness, going to be awareness of by the burgeoning American chip industry, so to speak, that you're right there. Okay. Is that not the case that they need to find you, or have they already found you?
Well, you're correct. I mean, it's the same thing you said at the start of this. I didn't realize that the two of you guys were out there until
Right.
recently. So it's getting that awareness out, because it is such a scarce community, that commodity. Even to get them to believe you that the product is that pure, it is that clean, is a process that takes a little bit of time. And
Mhm.
for us, we're lucky in that we bring our sand up at 99.86 in raw material. We take it to a 3N or a 99.9 with a simple water wash. We can take it now to a 5 and now into a 6N product at 99.999. And I think what a lot of people don't really understand is that every time you add a 9, it's exponential in its value, in the way it's used, albeit the amount of volume required is less because it goes into higher end products. But from a value chain, it is exponential. And so the availability and of an ultra high purity silica, combine that with what's happening in the US, as Brian talked about, the innovation, the research and development. People are starting to be better and more efficient at their battery technology, their solar technology, their AI technology. But as a result of that, they need higher purity, cleaner silica, and they need the impurities out of it. And so even though you're at 99.999, if it's got 2 parts per million boron, some industries can't use it.
Oh,
And so
absolutely not.
you really need to understand your impurities as well.
Mhm.
And I think from our perspective, although we're sitting right next door to, one of the largest markets in the US, we're hopeful that national or globally, everyone will see that there is a high purity product that people will demand worldwide, that they'll come to Manitoba to seek it out.
Well, one of you said something that stuck in my mind when we started this. The fact is that when you look at these lists of critical materials, okay, so you see dysprosium or you see cobalt, and we can all visualize those things. They're metals, right? But even if you're savvy enough to know that dysprosium metal doesn't mean anything because the actual use is as an alloy, but the problem is that nobody in general understands that if you put silicon metalloid, the so-called metal, if you put that in the list of critical material, everybody would laugh and they'd say, gee, we're walking on it. Everything you see is made out of this. And you're telling me it's critical. What's critical is the processing of it to get to the it's got to be made pure enough so we can contaminate it just right to make the products that we all depend on. So it's going. I don't know if silicon is on anybody's critical materials list, or if silica is, if it's been thought out, is what I'm saying. But you know what? You guys belong on a unique list. Because the human race, for what it's worth, has created the ultra high purity silicon and germanium. Okay, and you're the only ones that can do it. You've got the critical raw material for the critical material we need to have this computer, television, the glasses you're wearing. Okay, we can't have any of that without your product. And to wind this up, I think the big issue here is education. I don't
Yes.
think that people understand how I always joke with young people. I say, here's an iPhone. Can you fix it? Doesn't work. No. Well, here, let's take it apart. What's this little tiny thing? Here, look, use a magnifying glass. That's called an integrated circuit. How do you make that? Well, it's got 150 layers. Oh, yeah? But it's a hair only as thick as a hair. Yeah, that's right. So you're in a very high tech area, both of you, and you are not comparable to a giant iron mine, in near Belo Horizonte, Brazil. Not at all. And so I have to wish you luck, because the big issue here is to get the people who the people who buy your product, people who make the products that use your raw material, they understand what they need. It's the people who buy it that don't understand it. And a lot of those people live in Washington, Ottawa, Brussels, and Rio, places like that. So good luck, gentlemen, because I think you both got winners. I really do. Thank you very much for this very enlightening discussion.
Thanks, Jack. Appreciate your time. Faisal, great to meet you.
Yeah, likewise, Brian. Thank you. And thanks, Jack. And thanks to the CMI group to put this thing together.